Hi, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Data Chat Live. This is Cameron Cowan coming to you live from Pleasant Grove, Utah, here at the Observe Point headquarters. With me, as per our usual agreement, is Mike Fong calling in from lovely London. Mike, how is it over in London?
It's very London. It's very grey and rainy. It's threatening to have a shower, but I'm not a weatherman. It's great to be here again, and also with our guest Jeff.
Yeah, we're excited today to have Jeff Wheeler join us. Jeff is a product manager over at partner and friend Didomi. Jeff, why don't you say hello to the folks?
Hey guys, nice to meet everyone. I'm actually just west of Cameron here in Eagle Mountain, Utah, so happy to be here today.
Yeah, it's exciting to have another local product manager in the privacy space not too far. Jeff and I can get together for lunch and talk about all things data privacy. Now, Jeff, I know that Didomi is fairly well known over on Mike's side of the world, over in Europe. But you guys are a bit of a new entrant here in North America. Why don't you tell the audience a little bit about Didomi, what you guys do, and the evolution of the company as you've started to migrate across the Atlantic?
Sure, happy to. As you said, Cameron, Didomi is a French-based, Paris-based consent and preference management platform. They've originally launched building privacy centers in early 2017, just pre-GDPR, and then over the years have developed into a consent and preference management platform. In the last 6 months, they've hired a North American-based team, myself, a VP of sales, who's out of New York, and a marketing lead. And we're trying to really globalize the company and launch our consent and preference expertise worldwide.
Awesome. And I love to see more entrants into this market specifically. I think Europe's had a lot of love given the early arrival of GDPR, and we're a little bit lagging here in the US as far as our different state laws. But I love to see additional consent and data privacy technologies coming and making a big splash here in the US. I know we've got a couple of big ones. In fact, Mike, that's something we were chatting about on our last Data Chat Live. We had just hot off the presses done some research as far as market share. Why don't you pull some of that up? And I have a couple of questions for Jeff specifically on, as we looked at our customer base and some of the organizations we've worked with, obviously we saw a bit of a heavy end of the market, as it were, with OneTrust and TrustArc predominantly owning the space here in North America, but seeing a lot more fragmentation, as you'd expect, a lot more business being spread out in Europe. I know you've had a chance to quickly look over this. Just give me your sense about where you see the consent and data privacy markets here in North America and how you see them different from your experience with Didomi in Europe.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think what we've really seen even this year is just how quickly and constantly changing really the consent and preference market has been. I think it's very typical to see the players that you see up there, in the European market. But what you see in the North American market is really the two main players. And as even as recent as last Friday, when California released their pre-draft rulings on consent, it's really kind of changing the way that we need to look at it. And I think you're even seeing that from other people in the market who are even starting to introduce their own platforms. So obviously, you're seeing the big players like you expect to see, but the idea of companies like Didomi coming in that are really specializing in consent and preference is really going to start to, I think you're going to start to see a bigger impact in those in the market, because you can't just look at consent as cookie consent anymore. There's so much more to it, and there's so much more that you need to be prepared for. As each state requires certain requirements around consent and preference. But even what you're seeing in Europe is you're seeing certain regulators like CNIL and Italy and so forth and so on that are having very specific requirements. And you can't just have consent be a checkbox anymore. There's got to be. It's much more detailed, much more complex than that.
Yeah,
And
I
Jeff,
love that. Oh, good, Mike.
Jeff, we looked at this data just in preparation for this session, and it's clear that there are the two big leaders in both US and Europe, but we also see just a higher level of competition in Europe, because obviously the market has existed for longer over here. One interesting thing that you called out yesterday was actually that organizations are now getting to the point where they're actually switching between CMPs. We noticed that, I think you said yesterday, that actually LiveRamp has started to wind down its CMP business. Is that correct, if I remember correctly?
Yeah. There's I want to say it was last year sometime, March or April, they announced that they were going to, stop trying to support their own CMP.
Right.
And so I think you're seeing a couple of things that are happening. You're seeing, companies like that are moving more to what they specialize in, because I think they've realized that things are complex. And I think one thing that you're not able to see on the screen that's really important to highlight is, especially in the U.S. in particular, and we've seen a little bit in Europe, is there's been this ongoing kind of idea of like trying to manage your own CMP. And the conversations, that we've had over the years, whether at Adobe or previous experience of other CMPs, is they don't realize the undertaking that really entails. And in the U.S. in particular, some of the uncertainty and ambiguity around what those laws mean just makes that more and more difficult to try to maintain, like what I've always called like a homegrown CMP.
Absolutely.
And so there's that. And then obviously once GDPR hit, we're just passing the anniversary of GDPR. I think there was an initial, let's get something in place. And some of those initial like contracts and some of those initial offerings are starting to expire, and they're looking for alternatives to kind of better suit their needs, because there's been a change, right? There's been rulings that have happened. There's been, the idea of, moving away from like dark patterns and where's your data stored, and many different like factors that kind of come into play.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And this is a maturity curve, right? We've seen, so basically what GDPR is, 4 years and 8 days old now. So it's going to school. It's going to primary school, what we call here. And it's, the vendors in the space, the offerings in the space, they are maturing. It's a competitive market, as I'm sure you know more than anyone else, or three of us, Jeff. So absolutely, we do expect to see switching back and forth. We're seeing acquisitions as well. We know that some of the big players are acquiring their rivals, and then obviously migrating those customers over. So regardless of which CMP anyone has gone for, there is work to be done on the maintenance side. There are legacy CMPs to be removed, as we saw on our chart. And for me, it's almost the same old story. ObservePoint has been seeing like legacy technology stuck on a website because everyone didn't know to move away, or everyone didn't know it was there to be removed. So it's just another example of digital transformation on an ongoing basis that needs ongoing and regular QA to keep your website updated, really.
Yeah, and I think I see a couple of waves very distinct for the two different sides of the Atlantic. In Europe, as you guys have mentioned, people are now to the end of those first set of contracts. They knew they had to get something out there, so they just slapped something on the website in a lot of cases. And for a lot of companies we've worked with, that's been a bad experience. Yeah, it may have worked good enough or close to good enough when they first implemented it, but over the course of the last 2, 3, 4 years, things have fallen apart. And the question now is, do I stay with what I implemented and just try to get it back to where it was and improve it, or do I switch over to somebody that's maybe a little more focused on what I need as a business specifically? And that leads to the second wave, which is what we're seeing here in the United States, which is we are now thinking, okay, we need to be more mature about consent and data privacy, and we need to get caught up to our European counterparts. And so we're at that first wave where it's like, just get something on the site, which is why I love the fact that Dodomi and others are really making a push into this market, because it's giving people a lot more choice than what they've had over the last couple of years. And that actually leads me to something that's interesting about Dodomi. Jeff, you've mentioned it a few times. You don't just say consent management. I've noticed almost every time you say consent and preference management. Tell me a little bit about how Dodomi's thinking about how those two worlds come together, and what you see as the unique proposition of Dodomi focusing not just on consent modals, but consent and preference.
No, it's a great question, and I'm glad you picked up on that, because I do call it out very specifically. It's very easy to say you do cookie consent, and I think I've always kind of told people, and I've said this actually on multiple webinars, like if all you're doing is cookie consent, you're already behind the curve in compliance, whether it's in the U.S. or Europe. Whether it's the deprecation of third-party cookies, and the move to whatever technology is going to be, you're probably already out of compliance, because There's so many other technologies that happen on the site. And when you start to think of it that way, and then you start to think of it from like a preference point of view, you're really taking the customer experience and taking really the user experience into full account. Because there's cookie consent and there's compliance, which is like a legal perspective, and then you've got your preference management, which is a non-legal perspective. But they still kind of tell the overall picture of like your user and what they want and how you can interact with them. And so, from our point of view, really what you're talking about, the way I refer to it is like a unified consent profile. It could be a legal consent or a non-legal consent, which could be a preference. Maybe a preference is a legal consent as well, right? I mean, there's multiple ways to look at it. But it's being able to take that as a whole and tell a story to your user that, hey, we respect what you do. We respect your wishes and your requests, and then we're going to be able to serve you experiences based off what you want. And so it really kind of combines an overall user experience with both that legal and non-legal consent.
Yeah, I love that. And it starts to get a little bit closer to what I've known and done in a lot of my career, where you look at MarTech, and yeah, you have to have cookie consent from a legal perspective, and also to then know what you can and can't fire from a tag and a cookie perspective. But it's also about, well, how do I personalize those experiences? How do I deliver more relevant experiences through testing and personalization engines, through the analytics data that I'm capturing and then storing in my DMP or my CDP? So I like that the way you're talking about it. Yes, you check all the boxes you need to check legally, but you're starting to also create a broader ecosystem that helps inform a lot of the different parts of any company's MarTech stack.
Yeah, exactly. And I think one of the side benefits that I've seen from it is there's always this underlying tone, when you speak with a company or one of your customers that's trying to comply from a legal perspective. And there's always the same buyer, and it's typically the marketer, right? And that marketer tends to have a natural fear of the privacy officer because they don't want to upset the privacy officer. They're afraid of coming out of compliance. And when you talk to the privacy officer, they have the complete opposite opinion. They want to work with the marketer. They want to make sure that they're not affecting a bottom line, that they're not affecting a user experience. And what we've seen is when you start to combine this consent and preference together into one, it really kind of helps ease that tension between the two. And it helps the privacy officer feel, hey, we're compliant, we're respecting the wishes of our consumer, and then it's giving the marketer the flexibility to complete that user experience that they're trying to achieve on our site.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. The more we can do to bridge those two worlds of marketing and data privacy. I know that you and I were both at the IAPP event in DC not that many weeks ago, and that was a common theme that we heard, was that these two organizations, they both know they should be working together, but a lot of times they either are afraid to or don't know how to. In some cases, they know they have a data privacy. The marketers know they have a data privacy team, but they've never even heard their names, and vice versa. So I love that anything that we can do and you can do as a business to bridge that gap is a good thing.
There's also this fear from marketers that the data privacy people are going to come and take away all their data and take away all their marketing opportunities. So just like anyone watching this, the privacy people, they're not bad people. They're there to protect your brand, they're to protect your organization. They're not going to just take away your optimization data and leave you with with no data and no people to market at.
Yeah. And Mike, bringing you back in from a European perspective, one of the other things we've been keeping an eye on and talking about potentially taking away data is the ability to share data cross-continent. Part of our session today is all about what it looks like to do data privacy, not just in Europe or not just in America, but across the Atlantic. What are some of the trends that you're seeing there? And I know there's been some news recently about maybe some agreement happening. What's the status there?
Well, let me share my screen again and bring up the official press release by the European Union. So this is about 2 months old, just over 2 months old. Back in towards the end of March, the EU and the US, so that is Ursula von der Leyen and Joe Biden, just stepped out together and had a joint press conference. And in that press conference, they announced that they would an agreement in principle to again start trying to allow to put together an official mechanism for data to be transferred across the Atlantic Ocean. So say European customers' data could be processed by American companies in America, for example. And there has been some progress on that. So that press announcement originally was the 25th of March. Now there has been some progress, and essentially the progress is they're still working on it. Right, I'm not going to go into all the legalese. I'm definitely not someone that is going to be able to talk through this in a few minutes. But on the other side, right, there are also other forces. So we know that there is an organization called None of Your Business, or NOYB. And they're on the other side. They really want to protect customers' rights. And so they are really being very strict, running things by the book and putting in test cases to see how the data protection authorities in the EU are actually going to react to these test cases. And they've actually had an update there. So just to remind you of one of their test cases, there was an organization, it was a medical information website, and the NOYB's test case was put forward that they were using Google Analytics. The Austrian data authorities sided with NOYB, and they said that this website's use of Google Analytics was not up to scratch according to GDPR. Here is the publicly released English translated version of their decision, and I'm just going to highlight a couple of passages. So the first bit here is just to say that Google and this website are essentially, this bit says that because Google, the second respondent, is in America and it is an electronic communications service provider, it means they are under the jurisdiction of essentially the Cloud Act in the US. So the claim that European customers' data was not protected because the FBI or the CIA could demand Google hand that data over. Now, that's never actually, apparently, like, as far as I know, that's never actually happened. So even though the US authorities have the power to do that, they've never actually gone and done
But
it.
the concern is that they could. Is that right?
Exactly. But last month, there was an update, and this is on the NOYB EU website. The Austrian Data Protection Authority has updated, clarified, I should say. They have declared that Google's IP anonymization is a useless protection measure.
Wow.
You might know, or you might have seen, Google Analytics users might have seen, I think it was a Google Analytics 4 blog post or maybe an email which came out saying, Google Analytics 4 is secure, we anonymize IP address. Well, the Austrian DPA says that's not good enough, actually. Further, they've said that a risk-based approach is also not appropriate because that's very subjective. And when we say a risk-based approach, that's, I believe that's kind of vaguely legal lingo for saying use your common sense. So if if your data is medical or personal or to do with religion or gender, like very sensitive stuff, then it's a higher risk. And if it's stuff that's of a less sensitive nature, then it's lower risk. And
Mm.
some organizations were arguing that this risk-based approach would, would lead how high or how or low your security measures were. But the Austrian DPA says actually no, they rejected the notion of applying a risk-based approach. And this just came out at the start of May. So it's still, there's still lots of work in progress. It's not going to be a quick angle. You've got NOYB on one side really fighting the consumer's corner, and then you've got the EU and the US on the other side trying to figure out a business-friendly way so that data can be transferred back and forth.
Oh, Mike, I don't think you're giving our audience much comfort with some of these updates. I think there's still a lot to be,
Hey,
if not
don't shoot
concerned
the
about, at least very aware
messenger.
of.
Messenger.
Yeah, Jeff, I'd like to get your just opinion on this. Obviously, you've been in the data privacy space for a while, not just with consent, but broader. When people think about how they should be handling data transfers, data storage, where the data is being collected, any perspective on how you're thinking about this and the advice you'd give to customers?
Man, it's a loaded question.
It is.
I mean, what we're really getting set up for now is Schrems 3 at this point is what it feels like. To be honest with you, I think there's a lot to kind of unpack there. The immediate advice, my immediate advice has always been, if you're worried about, like let's say, CMP for instance, if you're worried about where your consent data is stored or where your data is stored, I would store it in the most, data protective country in the world right now. And I think where we've typically seen that is Germany. And that's why I think you see a lot of these data providers that will store their records. If they're using like AWS, they're storing it in Frankfurt. But it's kind of like, it's always an interesting topic because I think in our space in particular, people are looking for like the immediate solution, and they're not really considering like big picture. Like, because if you're really worried about your data, are you really thinking about how did your data get there? How many servers worldwide is it taking to get there?
Yeah.
How soon will the U.S. How soon will the U.S. customer care about where their data is stored? Are they going to care if it's being stored in Europe or the U.S. or whatnot? So, my immediate response is, choose where you want your data stored by, where you feel like it's most secure from a data privacy perspective, which my suggestion is typically Germany because they're always really strict about it. But, I think we're going to see some pretty significant changes, down the pipe around this. And really what you're seeing is, in my opinion, the exact reason why we don't have a federal privacy law in the United States as well. It's part of the intelligence community that's kind of preventing that from happening. Until that's figured out, we're just going to keep having the same conversation, over and over again.
Yep. And Mike, I noticed you pulled something up. It actually looks like maybe the Observe Point reporting tool. What are you showing to us here?
Yeah, so just on the topic of kind of where the data resides, obviously, one of the features that Observe Point has as part of our privacy suite of functionality is the ability to actually resolve the final location of the IP address of each and every network request. So if there are customers out there, I'm sure customers watching. I'm sure you're aware of this feature, but if you're not, I just want to highlight that this really is a starting point, or one of the starting points, where customers can figure out where their data is being stored. Obviously, we if someone is downloading it on a USB stick and then taking a boat across the ocean, we can't help you control for that edge case. But any internet data transfer, we can track those for you. And that's a great starting point if you're on trying to make sure your data is residing in Frankfurt, for example, or you're trying to make sure your data is residing in the US or Belgium or England, wherever. This is something that's available to all our customers and is very very relevant for this conversation. I'm also keeping an eye on the chat, and we have a question from David Wartell, or I hope I'm saying that right. The question is, US authorities never asked to get access to Australian data collected by Google. Will we really be aware if they were to ask for the data?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question. And I think that's part of the fear, quite honestly. You mentioned earlier that the rulings that we've seen aren't because something has happened, but because something could happen with those different agencies requesting data. If they did the request, I would hope we'd have transparency into that, but I'm not banking on that either. So I think the question is outstanding.
I agree. I think if, as a consumer, I can imagine that my data is stored everywhere, and I can imagine that basically, you receive spam, you receive, all kinds of inbound marketing messages. No one's ever told me that someone's asked for my email address. I find it highly unlikely if authorities were to go to Google or Snowplow or Adobe and demand an entire customer data set. I find it highly unlikely that I'd be notified.
Yep. Looking back at the chat, the other thing that I saw pop up from Tyrone, talking about those geolocations and being able to map each network request. I do know that there's a number of our customers that will set up kind of a naughty list. Like, okay, here's the countries I know I absolutely shouldn't be sending data to. Like for some companies, it may be, okay, Iran, North Korea, and Russia. Those three places, I know they're bad. There's some other places that may pop up on that list that I want to review. So they'll set up rules that say, okay, in my consent preferences or in my consent categories, if I ever see these four countries, stop it automatically, let me know and let me fix it. But I may see a longer list of, I don't know, like, should I be sending data to Jamaica? Maybe, but that's a little bit surprising to me. So simply having that level of visibility is useful. Tyrone's question, and Mike, I'll ask you as the technical expert on the call, can we tell not only the network or the origin and the destination of that data for the network request itself, but any piggyback tags?
Absolutely. So I'm going to take liberties today and actually just show you the relevant report, just for Tyrone's benefit. Of course, we're not plugging anything. It's purely because Tyrone asked so politely. We have a feature called Tag Initiators, which allows customers to see where and how any given network request or tag is initiated. So to answer your question directly, Tyrone, yes, we can tell if something is implemented directly, such as a tag like this one, right? This add tag, hard coded, or if it's implemented via a tag management system. Like, so here's the Google Tag Manager node, everything coming off the tree. And then we can see here, maybe we have what you might consider a piggybacking tag, because this is being loaded by something, which is being loaded by something, which is being loaded by something, which is being loaded by GTM. So I hope that answers your question, Tyrone. Plug over.
Yeah, every one of those network requests has its own signature and information about it that we pull, and that includes the geo aspects of it. So not only can we tell you which countries your data are being sent to, but we can tell you which requests those countries are associated with, which is great visibility. Mike, one other thing I wanted to ask, it occurred to me that a lot of our focus is on Europe and the EU, and specifically as we talk about GDPR, but the country you're living in, the UK, has a little bit of an odd relationship right now. After Brexit, you're no longer part of it, but you still follow some of it. Help us sort through, like, where is the UK as far as data privacy and how aligned or not you are with the rest of Europe?
We don't use the B word anymore. Just kidding. Where Britain is, or where the UK is right now, is a strange place. We are officially no longer beholden to the EU's guidelines, but they do still have, they still have a very large market. And right now, British or UK's data laws are deemed to be, or they've been certified as adequate by the EU. That is to say, our data protection laws are good enough to be compatible with the EU, therefore we can continue to do data transfers. Now, of course, that's the case. The day we left the EU, our data laws were essentially the same. So, of course, we're adequate. But we now have the ability to diverge if we want. And the government is, I was actually part of a feedback session with some of the team that are working on considering how and where divergence from those data laws would actually benefit the UK's economy. But it is a fine balancing act, because you diverge too far in terms of potentially lowering regulations, and the EU can take away the adequacy judgment. And then that would be quite bad, because in theory, we couldn't transfer data to and from Europe anymore. But at the same time, to realize the benefits of Brexit is to, in some cases, change the way. So can we change the way personal data is used, or medical data is aggregated, or can we change the way, say, DNA information is accessed, so make it more open source, so that we can develop new breeds of animals or better medical outcomes, right? So that's where the UK is in right now. It's trying to innovate around those data guidelines without falling foul and losing that authorization, or that adequacy agreement.
Yeah, I think it's something that's on the minds of everybody and countries across the world. We've been talking mostly about Transatlantic, but just a number of weeks ago, the Commerce Department here in the United States announced a new, let's see, what do they call it? A CBPR forum. It's essentially the US and Canada, along with South Korea, Taiwan, the Philippines, Singapore, and Japan coming together and saying, we need to figure this out. We need to have a good framework to transfer data, to be able to store data in each other's countries, but do it in a reliable way. And I think as we see the UK evolve and try to do it their own way, hopefully we can all get together and do it in such an appropriate way that we all feel comfortable, we have the right certifications, but still have the autonomy to do what's best for our citizenry and the responsibilities we have. All right. Well, looking at the time, we're right at the bottom of the hour. So I want to thank specifically Jeff Wheeler. Jeff, thanks for coming on, telling us about Dadomi. We're very excited for your future success as you guys branch out and grow here in North America. Love the opportunity to partner with you. So thank you for joining.
Yeah, guys, appreciate it. Glad to be here anytime.
Yep. And as always, thanks, Mike Fong, for giving us your perspective from the other side of the pond. For now, this is Cameron Cowan live from Pleasant Grove, Utah. Thanks for joining DataChat Live, and we'll see you next time.
Just one public service announcement. Anybody who happens to be in London next week, Observe Point will be at the Digital Trust London conference at the PrivSec World Forum. So if you want to talk more about my political opinions, or you want to talk more about actual data privacy, do drop by our booth, come and collect a pair of socks, and I'll be looking forward to seeing anyone there.
Thanks for that, Mike. Okay, until next time.